So let's get started. Hi everyone, my name is Hemanth Gundavaram. I am on the faculty here. I run with Professor Rachel Rosenblum the Immigrant Justice Clinic. I also teach immigration law and administrative law. So you're here for the Daynard Roundtable discussion, Defying Borders and Binaries, Legal Resistance and Civil Disobedience During the Rise of White Nationalism. So we have 4 wonderful guests here today for this roundtable discussion, but before I start that, I wanted to just thank Dick and Carol Daynard for hosting Prerna here. This Daynard Fellowship has been going on for many years. It's a really wonderful opportunity. So let's just thank them. And then I also want to thank Lucy Williams for inviting me to do this and also for setting this whole program up. So I'm going to very quickly introduce the 4 roundtable participants, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves also. So first we have Prerna Lal. Prerna was integral to establishing United We Dream and the Dream Activist Network, both led by undocumented youth. That'll be kind of a theme for a lot of the discussion today is immigrant organizations and immigrant activism led by immigrants themselves. The organizations mobilized thousands of undocumented immigrants to push for the Federal Dream Act in 2010, and that ended the deportation of undocumented youth, or many undocumented youth, and secured DACA, deferred action, for childhood arrivals under the Obama administration. As an undocumented law school graduate, Prerna was among the first in the country to obtain a license to practice law, and as a result of the activism, the US government sought to deport many of those people, but Prerna won legal permanent residency after a long court battle, and in April 2018 became a US citizen. As a nonprofit policy attorney in Washington, D.C., Prerna worked at Asian Americans at Advancing Justice, that's hard to say, spearheading initiatives relating to extending DACA, temporary protected status, and parole in place for many family members. As an immigration attorney, clinical supervisor, and lecturer at the clinic of UC Berkeley, Prerna mentored a new generation of public interest law students and now is continuing that type of work. So thank you for coming. Okay. Next is Marissa. I used to work with Marissa at Mitts Levin. Marissa is the managing attorney at KIND, Kids in Need of Defense. KIND is an organization that protects unaccompanied minors. It was started by the Microsoft Corporation and Angelina Jolie. I don't know if you've never...
No, I've never met Angelina.
Never met Angelina?
But I get to call her Angelina.
She began her legal career at Mitts Levin, doing business immigration for 9 years. While at Mitts Levin, she also maintained a robust pro bono practice. And she did a year-long fellowship at the Boston-based asylum organization, PAIR. PAIR is actually the organization through which we get many of the cases in the Immigrant Justice Clinic as well. Marissa has previously served as a board member of the PAIR Project. In 2011, she was the recipient of the Richard Mintz Pro Bono Award, and in 2012, the PAIR Project honored her with the Pro Bono Mentor of the Year Award. From 2012 to 2015, she served as the manager of international services at the global law firm of Ropes and Gray, and she's a graduate of NYU Law School and Dartmouth College. Next is Daniela Carbajal. Daniela is an immigrant from Colombia and a DACA recipient. She came to the United States with her parents when she was 2 years old and has been covered under the DACA program since 2015. Daniela became involved with Centro Presente, which is the organization she works for, through the organization's School of Leadership, which she's going to discuss a little bit today. And she continued to be an active member and volunteer for a couple of years. Now she's the new immigrants' rights organizer at Centro Presente. So, Thank you, Daniela. And then lastly, Patricia Montes. Patricia is the executive director, also at Centro Presente, one of the longest-standing immigrant-led immigrant rights organizations in Massachusetts. I think has been around for almost 30 years. Having earned her degree in journalism in Honduras, she worked in public relations and communications in both government agencies and non-governmental agencies in Honduras, as well as in television production for 6 years. She has served as the board chair of the Boston Women's Fund and is currently on the executive board of Alianza Americas. My Spanish pronunciation is not very good. She's also been a member of an international human rights mission to Mexico and Central America, assembled, which has documented the violations of human rights of migrants in their travels from Central America to the United States. She has presented on the results of the mission in Latin America, Washington, D.C., and Geneva, and she's the producer of The Invisible Crisis, the female face of forced migration documentary. So, thank you. So, a wide array of experiences and work done in the immigrant community, and that's sort of the theme for today's discussion. So I'm going to let each person just talk for a couple minutes about how they got involved in the work they do, why they do the work they do, and what kinds of work they do currently. I think that'll be a helpful introduction before we get to some questions. I have 5 or 6 or 7 questions that I want to ask, and I'll let them answer those, and then I'll open it up to everybody else so you can ask some questions as well.
Okay, well, I mean, I think if you were here on Monday, you heard the whole story, but just, in a little, if you were not there, got involved because the issue of immigration directly impacted me and my family and my friends, because we were undocumented for more than a decade in the U.S. when we got here, and I felt like the only way that I could live a more complete life, given everything, was to get involved. And also then seeing so many other people in similar situations sort of propelled me to keep doing the work that I'm doing today.
Hello. So you already sort of know what I've done before I got here. I've been doing immigration law for 15 years now in a variety of settings, which I think is ideal for what I do now, to be honest with you. KIND is a national organization. I manage the Boston office, but we have a network of 10 offices nationwide. We have headquarters in DC, so it's an amazing vantage point with which to see what's going on across the country, how Boston fits into it, how policy fits into it, and the like. How I got here is really less inspiring. I ended up working for a big firm when I graduated and got placed in the immigration section. And it's one of those times in my life where things happen for a reason, and sometimes I think that that's true. Immigration law is the way my brain works, and it was a really good fit, and I've never looked back and continued to practice it from day one. How I got to where I am now, I think, is through a series of continuing to move forward toward what I really wanted to do. I knew intellectually that immigration law fed the creative fire that I had. What I was doing with it wasn't really where the fire was burning bright. And so I think I got to where I am just by continuing to maintain the connections I've made along the way doing the work that I was doing. In terms of why I continue to do it, it's the most interesting thing I've ever done, and I work really hard, but as everybody does in this panel, but it doesn't feel as hard because it's doing what I really love to do, and I would be remiss if I didn't say I also get to do what I love to do because I have an amazing support circle of people that help me do it. So.
Okay, so as a community organizer, Centro Presente, most of my work involves mobilizing our community. Centro Presente represents mostly Central American immigrants, mostly undocumented. So it really involves mobilizing and motivating our members to defend their rights, to educate themselves, and to be autonomous. And the reason I became involved was because of I am a DACA recipient. I have had DACA, Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, for since 2012, so for a while now. And I was undocumented for about a decade as well. And I just got tired of just complaining about my situation and not really doing anything about it, because I knew that there were organizations and people, really brave people that were doing the work, fighting for our rights. But I hadn't really felt that push until the 2016 election. And I had known about Centro Presente for a while. I live in East Boston, and Centro Presente at the time is in East Boston. And I just went to a volunteer meeting. I said I wanted to be more involved, and I began participating in different events until I started. I was a more active member volunteer, and then now I'm working as a community organizer, and I'm really grateful. I've learned a lot, and I found in Centro Presente kind of like a second family, even though most of our members are TPS recipients, not necessarily DACA recipients or dreamers. But I felt that I could relate to them and that I could express myself and my frustrations. And yeah, that's why I do the work I do.
Why I do what I do. So I started organizing when I was in my 20s in Central America, in Honduras. And I did it because I was tired of injustice. I grew up in a very poor family, and it's not the same being poor in the U.S. and being poor in Latin America. It's different. My father was a peasant. My father used his first pair of shoes when he was 14 years old. And I grew up in the rural area, in a place with no electricity, no drinking water, sometimes no food, and no shoes. Now I buy too many because I have a problem. But I was tired of being poor, and I realized, when I went to college, that my father was a person that was doing a lot of work, right? And that he was not lazy. He was a hard worker. And I learned about poverty, and I made a decision when I was in my 20s. I really want to organize against structural poverty, because it's not fair for people like to have kids and not have enough money to eat. It's not fair, right? And I learned that poverty was not coming from the sky. I learned that poverty was part of the result of a structural problem that is part of an economic system that it helps to have a lot of people, right, in extreme poverty and from Honduras. And since then I have been organizing. Then I moved to the US 15 years ago with a lot of privilege because I married a white guy. And my brother, the same year that I moved to the US 15 years ago, my older brother, who came to the US with no documents, was deported during the Bush administration. And since then, I have been working directly with the Central American immigrant community in order to empower the immigrant community and fight for systemic changes. And we not just mobilize, we also try to organize and empower the immigrant community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have, like I said, 5 or 6 or 7 questions. Whenever I say that, I have closer to 10. But so I know this is a difficult question with everything happening, but what if you had to choose sort of 1 or 2 issues that you think are the most important, or the ones that you are focusing on the most? What would they be? What are sort of the 1 or 2 issues in immigration law that you think are the most pressing at the moment?
You said it immigration law,
Well, so KIND specifically works with unaccompanied children. So children who enter the United States without a parent or legal guardian and are put into removal proceedings. So my 1 or 2 things are probably really technical, but would make a huge difference in the lives of the children who've been severely traumatized and continue to be traumatized by the system. But it would be a stalled immigration service that just fails to even act. Not even act correctly, just literally act would be a huge problem in our world. You can't really fight against a decision that you don't actually receive. So that's a struggle. And then just the, I'm calling them microaggressions against the immigration courts. Moving them out of the Department of Justice and actually making them real courts would be huge. It's a huge issue now that they're not, right? And so empowering them to be independent and allow them to exercise discretion, which is not happening, probably would be my two biggest. Oh, should I speak? Sorry, I'll move. That's probably better.
Yeah, I think I feel similarly about just the dismantling of the legal immigration process that's happening in the administration currently, where everything from visas for families to the immigration court system sort of being halted to a stop, a standstill, and it's taking years to get relief for clients. A green card issue takes 6 months through like a simple marriage-based application, and now it takes like 2 years where practice. So you have case files open for years, you have frustrated clients who sort of want to travel or go somewhere or move on with their lives, and you are stuck in it and they're stuck in it at the same time. So that is a bit frustrating, I think, as well.
Yeah, and it's true of humanitarian forms relief too. Those are highly stuck in like no person's land.
Right.
And I said immigration law, but also just what are the pressing issues facing the immigrant community as well?
There are many issues, obviously, but for Centro, the one that is very relevant at this point is the TPS. I imagine that you're familiar with TPS, right? As you know, the conversation about immigrants and immigration in the U.S. have been focusing just around DACA. And I think that it was a strategy of the U.S. government, because it's not just about DACA and TPS. Our problems are beyond DACA and TPS, right? It's about decriminalization of the undocumented people and the criminalization of black and brown people in the U.S. And of course, the elimination of the programs are part, but TPS was invisible, and it was on purpose, because Central American immigrants have been invisible in the discussion about immigration in the U.S., and it was on purpose. Let's don't talk about TPS. So we launched a campaign 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, in order to organize our members and fight for their rights. And now, it's not just because Centro, because there are many other organizations around the country that have been doing a lot of work around TPS, but now we hear a little bit more about TPS on the media. So Centro Presente represents over 1,000 immigrants from Honduras and El Salvador that have TPS, that have been renewing TPS with Centro Presente for the past 20 years, and now they are going to be undocumented. Germany, Nicaragua, and then Haiti, and many other countries are going to be, losing their work permits. So that's a priority for us, especially because countries like El Salvador, Haiti, and Honduras are not ready to receive these people, and our governments are lying. They are saying, oh, we're going to receive you with open arms. How can a country like Honduras and El Salvador, that are the most dangerous places on earth, after Syria, can be ready to receive people that potentially can be deported from the United States? That's a lie. And I can share more information about what Centro is doing around that too, because we already conform to delegations to go to Central America to have many civil society organizations there in governments.
And I just want to make sure, can everyone hear in the back? No? So just if all of you can speak up a little bit. Thank you. So I know some of the issues that you mentioned that are the most pressing issues are ones that were exasperated by the current administration, but how did we get here in a more big picture sense, beyond just the last 18 months or 2 years? How did we get to this place?
I think in terms of immigration laws always have been defined by excluding one group of people and over another. And that's the history of immigration law in this country, as to who gets citizenship, who doesn't. You can see the evolution of that over time to where in 1924 you had a sort of a standstill of banning people from certain parts of the world. And it wasn't until 1965 that we liberalized sort of our immigration system and focused on more family-based immigration. and to allow, diversity as well in our immigration processes, and we have the civil rights movement thing for that. But I think what has happened over time as the U.S. has become more and more diverse with new immigrants is there have been, we haven't had immigration reform that's been good since 1986, and that's like over 30 years. And in the meantime, we have punitive laws. We have had laws that sort of trap people in the U.S. Instead of allowing them to travel freely. And I think that has exacerbated problems, basically.
Well, one thing that Presente really tries to focus on is the reasons why people are coming. Because we can talk about the internal issues and we can ask, why are all these people coming? What can we do to help them? But if we don't look at where the flow is coming from, what the conditions are in these countries, and why the conditions are like that, how U.S. military intervention has caused certain situations in countries of origin of many of the people that are coming to the U.S., causing them not to want to stay there because they're fleeing violence or fleeing poverty. And there are people that would want to stay in their countries, but unfortunately circumstances don't let them. And maybe Patricia can elaborate more on this, but that's one big issue that I see.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. I definitely see this as a legacy of, it's not just about Trump. I think people are, Trump, now that Trump is there, I'm sorry, but people of our communities were facing a crisis before Trump. And I think that that's a lot to understand, to say that, our problems we have a lot of problems now that Trump is in power. The system was there, that the system that was oppressing people before was there. The detention and deportation machine was there before Obama, and it's the legacy of many administrations. And I think that we also have to think about root causes of forced migration and the connection that Daniela was saying of U.S. foreign policy and forced migration is a direct connection. But also we also think about corporations and how the economic system is making profit with suffering of black and brown people in the U.S. Incarcerating kids is something that is unacceptable, and it's happening in the United States, a country that always talk about democracy, freedom, right? And we are incarcerating and accompanying minors that are coming from the most dangerous places in earth, that are looking for international protection. And here we are in the United States, putting them in cages. And I think that corporations are making billions of money incarcerating undocumented immigrants. 50% of the detention centers at this point are in the hands of corporations. 50%. And I think that that is insane, and it's not, ¿cómo se dice casualidad? It's not a coincidence that they are incarcerating immigrants. No, they are making profit with the suffering of our people.
And just to add to that, I think that, I think there's been a real ignorance of our immigration system to the point where when all the attention focused on it, it's almost like there's too much attention in a way, right? And not on the attention of making it work better or what have you. I could talk at length about all the weird ways immigration law is the way it is in 2018, right? And that's part of the reason why we are where we are, because we haven't given enough thought to it, right? We haven't done real immigration reform in a really, really long time.
So with all of these issues that are facing the immigrant community and in immigration law, there's a lot of different ways to get involved and make a difference. So the number one question I think I get from students who want to help are, should I go into direct client representation? Should I do activism or organizing? Or should I do some kind of policy work? And obviously you can find a job maybe where you get some mix of those, but really for most immigration positions you're going to be focusing on one or the other. So I'd love to hear all of you do something different. What is your pitch for students to be doing what you're doing, or if it's something different than what you're doing? I'm sorry, and also, what is the pitch for that?
I don't think you have to pick just one thing to do all your life. I think you can see what works for you, where you are, and in your life as well as where you're working, geographically. So you can get a job working at the border, you can get a job working with deportees, in terms of more social work, you can get a job in direct legal services. You can also use your direct legal services experience then for policy. And, or going to more appellate work. So there's sort of no, I think, you don't have to just do one thing, and I don't think there's just one way of making change.
So I feel that I couldn't do what I'm doing now without having experience doing immigration law myself. Like, that's just my personal opinion. Again, everybody's mind and everything works differently. But if I was going to be honest, one of the reasons I'm where I am now is because I burnt out doing it. Even though I switched my focus of who I was representing, who the client population, I've always said that the best and the most difficult thing about immigration law is that you're working with real people, right? You're not working with a corporation, and there's a person's lives. Even if it's a business immigration, right, their livelihood is the paperwork in front of you. And I just got to the point where I couldn't do it effectively and still maintain sanity. Right now, I manage a direct representation model, but I myself don't do it. And that's just being honest about, what you can do to get to where you are, but also being honest about what it's going to do to you too, and being prepared for that. Because it's tough. You may have your own personal story, and then you're taking on other people's stories. And you have to, I think, go into it with your eyes wide open. So.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. For both of you specifically, you do organizing and activism. Everyone here, I assume, is going to get a law degree. Joke. Not that funny. But even lawyers can do direct client representation, or they can do policy work or activism and organizing. And I know at Centro Presente you work with different lawyers. What's your pitch for why lawyers should be doing organizing or activism?
Okay, well, one thing I can say is that we've seen the positive outcomes of lawyers and organizers working together. For example, at Centro Presente, we have a monthly free legal clinic for our members. It's open to anyone that needs legal advice regarding immigration situation. And we also have a lawsuit. We partnered with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice in a lawsuit that Centro Presente submitted against the government and Trump. And a lot of what Centro Presente did was find the plaintiffs, mostly from their membership. Just teach them, let them know that they can be involved, that they can tell their story, they can use that to try to make a change.
Centro Presente is the named plaintiff.
Yes, Centro Presente versus Trump is the lawsuit. Yeah.
And we did it during the 90s too. It was, the organization had been using the same strategies since then. Many organizations around the country have been, using that, and I think it's powerful when you see attorneys working with organizers. It's very powerful. That's the result of the work. I don't really like advising people about what to do, but the only thing that I can say is listen to your hearts and think about what do you want to do with your life. It's hard. It's hard, but I think that it's not what defining and visualizing what do you want to do with your life is not going to come from advice from another person. It's going to come from your own heart and your own mind and your own desires. And if you want to make money, go to a corporation. That's a reality, right? But if you want to make changes, if you want to work for social justice and economic and political changes, and support other people, Maybe you're not going to make a lot of money, decent money, I think, for lawyers, right? And doctors usually, especially in the US. But you're going to be supporting change. And I think at this point in life it's very important because it's not just the immigration system, it's the economic system in general. We are killing our own planet, you know? And I think that we need to make change. And in order to make change, we need to work collectively, right? So I think that it's extremely important to work together. And I think the professor said, if you want to do something new, please do something new. Because obviously the strategies that we have in music are not working, right? So we need people with new and fresh ideas that are going to be able to challenge the system, to challenge the status quo. We need new attorneys, right? With new ideas. We need new generations of people because we're getting old. So we need new people that are going to be there, right? Fighting for justice and trying to change the system.
So what can students do now then? Is there something that students can do now to get involved? You know, we have a mix of first year, second, and third year students who are in Boston, so at different points at least, depending on co-op. So what can they do to get involved?
Well, there's a lot you can do. If you want to work specifically with Centro Presente, we have a few different campaigns. For example, our Know Your Rights campaign, which we focused a lot on this summer. Basically, it's spreading information about immigrant rights. So we partnered with the city of Somerville and we did a few community walks where we went to local Latino businesses. We gave out information about immigrant rights, and we spoke to owners, to employees, even customers that had questions and maybe didn't know where to find that information. So that's something we're always looking volunteers for. Also for tablings, we do tablings in areas that we know people are going to be walking by, for example, if they're going to work or coming from. And we also do workshops. We can always use volunteers for that. And yeah, just being there, sometimes kind of depends. Sometimes we need interpreters. Sometimes we need someone to just help us even with setting up a Facebook Live. I know Patricia yesterday was struggling because we had an event. Unfortunately, I wasn't there because I'm part-time now. And that's just simple things that we can always use help for. And I know there are other organizations that do a lot of work with accompaniment. There's one called Beyond, I think that's how they pronounce it. And basically they have volunteers that will accompany people who are afraid to just leave their homes to go to maybe a doctor's appointment because maybe they're undocumented, they're afraid that they're going to be stopped because it's just the fear that you have all the time that you're going to be arrested and deported, because that's how your mind works when you're in danger of being deported. And I say that because I lived it firsthand, 10 years old and thinking, oh, what if I get home and my parents aren't there? What do I do? Do I call them? How am I going to know that they're arrested? It's just something that goes on in your mind. So I think it's really important when there are people that are there to even just drive you to an appointment, go with you to a courthouse, to a doctor's appointment. Yeah.
Maybe like helping the directors to do a Facebook Live. It's not like something sexy for you, but I think that we also need people who can help us to write policy, for example, right? And I know you also are going to have a lot of examples, but for the past 10 years, we have been trying to change public policy at the state level with no success. And I think we also need lawyers, volunteers who can definitely help us to do something at the state level. And go to the state house, have real conversations with our state senators and representatives, because we need to change public policy at the state level. It's not just federal and international policy, because everything is connected. But there is a lot of work to do at the state level, and we also need a lot of support.
Co-op employer?
Yes, I was going to get to that. So I have a couple practical comments and then one like recruiting comment. First of all, I would learn Spanish if you don't already know it, or another language. That is, Portuguese is also good. I do not speak a foreign language, and it's a problem. I'm a little ashamed of myself. Continue to make connections. Go to meetings with other legal services organizations and figure out who's doing what. It may seem that we're all the same, but we're not. And it's really good to know, not just to know who the players are, but to know the type of work they're focused on so that you yourself can focus your energies on what you really want to do. And I think while it's important to take immigration law, I'm about to offend my host, it doesn't teach you how to actually do immigration law. I mean, when I first started being a lawyer, I was really a paralegal for 2 years, like just figuring out what I was doing. And I think it's important if you think you want to do immigration law direct representation to actually spend some time filling out the many, many forms you will get to know. I mean, a lot of immigration law is filling out forms, and if you walk into it thinking you're going to stand in the courtroom every day, unless that's, I mean, sometimes people do that, but that's really a small percentage of people. So, and we are accepting applications for summer interns. So, just going to put my plug in.
Marissa, you had mentioned kind of secondary trauma, and then along with that is self-care, and certainly having done the work, it's definitely this type of work more than any other I've done kind of stays with me. At points I don't want it to stay with me. And so I'm just wondering, I guess first is, how do you sort of deal, or do you get secondary trauma, and do you find that it's something that is more prevalent in immigration law? And then also, I guess, how do you deal with it? What is your sort of self-care? Because I do think when the students go on co-op or they're in a clinic, there's a lot of different places where it can manifest itself.
Well, I'm sure, hopefully I'm not the only person that can speak to this. I mean, I do think there's a difference between secondary trauma and burnout, right? I think the accumulation of secondary trauma can lead to burnout. But I think you have to be honest with yourself and let go of the guilt. We could all be doing 24 hours worth of work on behalf of our clients, but you won't be sustained if you do that. And I think it took me a really long time to recognize that. And now that I supervise other people doing this work, I'm very conscious of making sure that they don't do it 24 hours a day. I make simple decisions about my daily life that make big differences in the way I feel. And that's going to depend on what your family situation is and what you need in your life. I forego sleep so that I can work out in the morning because that's my release. But I think letting go of any guilt you might have about what it is you need is probably the most important thing. I know people can talk about yoga and all these other self-care things. That's all, I like yoga too. But I think the lack of feeling guilty about my choices is the single biggest thing I could do for myself, to not be trapped in that.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things as a lawyer is the kindness and compassion that you show your clients, you show it to yourself too. And it requires a lot of self-love, and also requires you to just know that you can do everything sometimes and still not win, and it's not your fault. And secondary trauma is a real big part of our work as immigration lawyers, as it's like our primary trauma too sometimes that comes in the way. And it's important to tell your supervisor or somebody when you're experiencing anything from nightmares to just being compelled to work on your client's case all the time, to sort of not being able to have the kind of work-life balance that you should be having. And I think it's really important to leave work at work, to be able to make sure that you don't answer emails or don't even read emails when you're not working. I think it's super important to not bring it into the home and just leave it at the office if you can. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's super important to try to not take every single thing personally in this line of work.
And then, yeah. Absolutely.
Number one, I think this is an amazing panel, and I have so much respect for the work that they are doing. I just want to mention something that happened Monday night. A group of us were taking Prerna out to dinner, a small group of faculty, and Hemanth was one of them. And while we were sitting at dinner, he got a text that a client in the immigration clinic had just won a hearing. It was a hearing that Hemanth did not believe they were going to win. There are some people in the room. Keely, I know you were one of them. I don't know the other students.
Do you want me to do? Oh, I can do it. It was Sammy Bloom, Keely, and then also Steph Gonzalez, Mike Morshed, who graduated, Scott McFall, who graduated, and Janae Agala Choquette.
Had worked on this hearing.
And Rachel's. It was also Rachel's case before. Sorry. And two experts from. Okay, I'll stop. A lot of people.
The joy at that table was palpable. I mean, it was so amazing. But it relates to what this question was and what people were answering. We talked about the trauma of bringing a case that you were so worried you might lose. And that what if you really thought you were going to lose, and losing sleep over did I make the wrong decision to go forward with this case, and what if I lose, and how do you live with yourself, and I think that's a real issue. I think it's easy to say leave your work at work, but I don't always leave my work at work. I didn't when I was a practicing poverty lawyer. And I know that Hemanth said that Keely and some of these students worked 50, 60 hours a week on this case. And I want to honor what you did. I want to honor what Hemanth did. I want to honor what these panelists do. And knowing that sometimes you're going to lose, but sometimes you're going to have a victory that you never thought you were going to have. And the joy, the incredible joy you feel for that mother and, if I believe, 3 kids or whatever, who is not going to be deported. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
My 40th birthday was the next day after the original hearing, and I thought we lost, and I think I need to do a redo for you.
So, I mean,
have a very good time.
if I could just add to that, I also think you can make small choices, right? I mean, I would love to leave my work at work, but I also have 2 kids. I'm just going to be honest. Like, part of my self-care is getting home for dinner every night, and that means I have to open up my computer later. But to me, my self-care is actually taking my work home and doing it later. So it can be small victories too, right? That can help propel you forward, so.
Okay, so I'm a professor. I can't not give homework. So I wanted to ask the panelists to say either some sort of like a book or 2 that you've read. And some of you mentioned when we talked before documentaries that you've watched that really either relate to your work, that you got you into the work, or while you've been doing the work is something that gave you information or gave you some motivation. So reading list, or I guess a Netflix list also is acceptable.
Yeah, I don't like to read heavy stuff when I get home, or I didn't before law school either, because enough you're reading in the world and in the news on a daily basis that can just consume you and make you depressed. So, I like fun reading, which is also sort of socially conscious. So I read a lot of fiction that is relevant, like fiction like, say, Americana, which is a great book about the human experience, but from a different standpoint. And I think.
Can you say that one more time?
Oh, Americana?
Yeah, and the writer?
It's Hemanth Gundavaram. She's a writer. She's a pretty famous Nigerian writer. But it's reading fiction is so much. It's great philosophy, especially which breaks down the way you write and think sometimes. So it's always helpful to read other things that are in different formats. Also enjoy a lot of Derek Bell's writing. The Space Traders is super amazing. Sort of fictional work, which also relates to it's basically about aliens who come to Earth and ask for all black people to be taken, off Earth, and basically the negotiations there. There's a lot of social messages as well that tie to both race as well as immigration. So it's sort of a fun way to both teach and receive a message, I guess. That doesn't have to be heavy, I guess.
So similarly, I try not to read anything heavy anymore. I read mostly mysteries. But I do think there's one book that I've been told has propelled people to specifically work with kind. Some of you might have heard of NBK's Journey by Sonia Navarro. And it's a framework with which to view child migration and forced migration. I have different things I think about it now that I've been doing the work for as long as I have than I did when I first read it. But I would definitely recommend if you want to specifically work with unaccompanied children.
What is that?
NBK's Journey by Sonia Navarro.
Mine is a bit heavy, and it's basically about the history of military intervention in Latin America. There's a book and a documentary, so if you're more into documentaries, you could do that. I think it's available on YouTube. It's Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez.
Yeah, the same one, I think. yeah.
You had that other, did you say you had another one?
Oh, it's another one, but I only know the name in Spanish. Las Venas Abiertas de América Latina. I don't know if Eduardo Galeano is very famous in Latin America. Some people know him in the US, but he's a very famous writer and politician. So the Las Venas Abiertas de América Latina is the
Open Veins of Latin America.
If you really want to understand about Latin, U.S. military, economic and political intervention, I think we sound like a broken record, but if you don't understand where your clients or future clients are coming, it's going to be hard, because you're going to be resolving individual cases without understanding the big picture. And you can check the data. Most of the immigrants that are coming to the U.S. are coming from Latin America, right? And most of them from Central America. And I think it's important to understand why they are coming and the connection of U.S. foreign policy and that forced migration. I think is extremely important to, support your cases, right? Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think I stayed within my allotted number of questions, so I wanted to open it up to all of you to ask questions. I have a couple in the holster, just in case. Any questions? Yes?
Hi, so you mentioned that there's kind of been a stalemate recently pushing state legislation, but if you had top 3 priorities of things that you'd like to see happen in Massachusetts, what would they be, and any efforts or coalition movement around that?
So the question was, what are the top 3 things that, if you could have something, because I think a lot of people have been talking about how it's really hard to get things to happen on the federal level, that on the state level, sometimes people have more success. So what are the top 3 things on the state level that you think could or should be done?
Many things. But I just want to say that we have 2 problems. I have been living in Boston specifically for 15 years. Since I came, I started organizing Centro Presente. And we have been trying, not just Centro, multiple organizations, many organizations have been trying to change the policy at the state level. And people are now saying, oh, he's the governor, he's a Republican. No, pay attention, the governor has been in the House for how many years? Less than 10, right? So, and I'm going to answer, but I just want to make sure that we understand why we're not able to change the policy at the state level. In our opinion, because two reasons. Number one, the leadership of the Democratic Party is a problem, specifically Robert Lal Legal, because we have to name it, the Speaker of the House. He doesn't have the political will to make any changes to support the undocumented immigrant community of Massachusetts. And the second thing is that we, the civil society organizations, are also part of the problem if we are not able to change our strategies. If we, I'm sorry, and excuse me because I'm going to use this language, but if we are in bed with the Democratic Party because we don't want to lose access to the State House, we are part of the problem. We need to change our strategies, right, in order to challenge the leadership of the Democratic Party. That's why we're not able to change priorities. States like Texas and many other, you can name it, have licenses for undocumented people, in-state tuition for undocumented students, the TROS Act or local versions of the state communities bill. We don't. And we are living in the progressive state of Massachusetts. We don't have anything, right? And we say that we are liberal, that we're progressive, you name it. And I think that we need to change that. Because if we're not able to make systemic changes at the federal and international level, at least we should be able to make those changes at the local and state level.
I think the tuition one is huge. I think the ideas one is huge. We did have one victory this year, so because all immigration laws go into doom right now, I'm at least going to say something positive. Yeah. And this is getting way in the weeds, but we took an SJC, a coalition of organizations, took a Supreme Judicial Court decision and managed to get it in the statutes regarding special immigrant juvenile status, a statutory basis for children ages 18 to 21, which is highly technical, but really awesome. It opens up a framework for legal relief for these children in a much more concrete way. And again, it's probably like the only successful state legislation to date that I can actually say. I mean, the problem with state advocacy for the bigger problems that we've talked about now is that it's state, right? You can't, it's not gonna, especially coming from Massachusetts, that's seen as so liberal. I don't know how much difference it's gonna make in Washington. So I think things like tuition and IDs and whatnot are really concrete ways that can really impact people's lives in a really direct way, even if we can't solve the green problem. So.
And that case, or that legislation Marissa was talking about was one where there was an SJC case that had already decided the issue, and the federal government was saying, well, that's just a court case, we're not going to honor that. So it was it was then the legislation actually is the one that the federal government should be honoring going forward.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yes.
All right, you co-op employers?
Oh, yeah, you asked about co-op employers, so I think, yeah. So,
Yeah.
a kind, yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the work you've done at Northeastern last year?
Right, so we haven't had, nobody's applied for a while, so I'm here to recruit. No, that's not the real reason I'm here, but it would be a happy coincidence. But, you know, it's similar, we try not to have too many interns at once because we want to make it, I'm sorry, using intern, co-op, student interchangeably, so apologies. We try not to have too many because we actually want it to be a very specific experience, being in court, filling out the forms I talked about. But it's really working one-on-one with our staff attorneys, direct representation attorneys, and fellows, specifically to do the whole body of casework. So it's intaking a child, writing an affidavit, preparing the paperwork, appearing in court, sitting in on our many strategy discussions and whatnot. But I'd be happy also to talk specifically with people. I don't want to bore everybody with our program.
So one thing that's come up in a lot of conversation in my communities as a disabled queer person of color is the proposal of the new public charge rule, which would try to prevent people basically immigrants who are disabled or chronically ill in one or more ways from entering the U.S. or being considered to enter the U.S., which actually is really similar to how Canada treats disabled folks that are trying to immigrate to Canada, contrary to a lot of Americans' privileged and unexamined praise of Canada as supposedly super progressive and awesome. And I'm wondering, in your work as advocates, as organizers, and as attorneys, where there might be opportunities for those of us in the disabled community who have not been deeply engaged on immigration work to be better collaborating, and not in a shitty, tokenizing, horrible way, but like in ways that actually honor a principle that I think we all try to live by, of nothing about us without us, which I know that you're doing at Centro Presente, and something that's very important for us in our communities as well. And of course, recognizing many of us are also immigrants in some way or another. My story is weird, but I'm not going to get into that.
I mean, I think there's a lot of intersection with disability justice and asylum work sometimes, in terms of defining particular social groups who can qualify for asylum. So that's a lot of where this whole disability justice comes into immigration law. And thankfully, the new public charge grounds don't really impact humanitarian visas as much. So that's still going to be around for a while. But, we're becoming more and more sort of able-bodied, able-minded in immigration law. Unfortunately, it's sort of been like, okay, who are the quote-unquote best and brightest, and there's a lot of discourse around immigration that's very, very problematic.
I mean, the public charge regulations haven't been technically published yet, but when they are, I think there'll be a lot of practical ways of a lot of organizations who are gearing up to have a fight are going to be putting out a lot of different, like, put your ear to the ground in terms of them putting out ways to comment on the proposed regulations that, to your point, really penalize employment and family-based immigration. Because the more unique comments they get, the more time they have to spend responding to them. It's just delays the implementation. That's true.
So basically, we should manipulate the fuck out of the notice and comment process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, any disability justice organization who wants to make a comment, and anyone really can make a comment.
Yep.
You don't have to be, a lawyer to make a comment.
And if you don't know what notice and comment is, take admin law.
I'll happily tell you all about it. I've been doing this for a while, and it's fun to accuse the shit out of this process.
From the organizing and political perspective, I can say that I love that you mentioned that phrase. I was asking Daniela, how do you say that in English? Because we try to live it. We live it, right? Centro Presente, that phrase. Nothing about us without us. Thinking about tokenizing, they always, I don't want to mention names, but there are other organizations that just call Centro Presente when they need brown people, right? To mobilize brown people to go to the State House, and I hate that. Because we also can think, we also can participate, right, in the decision-making process. We can also make our own proposals about policies that are going to affect our lives, right? And the members can also do that. They are people, maybe they don't have higher education, they can think. And I will challenge you. I think that, I don't think that we're not going to find the space within the system, how the system it is right now. Because the system, the structure is, is there, it's not waiting for us. I think that we have to create our own organizations. As you're going to be an attorney, just found your own organization and challenge the system. Because I think it's very hard. We're trying to change the system. We need to create alternatives. Because the way how the system it is right now is obviously not waiting for us. I don't know if that makes sense.
Questions?
I'm in the new law lab design class.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. I've never been told that I'm not lab. At the school here, we have the new law lab, and there's a design seminar this quarter, and we're working on a project for people going down to the southern border to work with immigrants, and we're trying to identify what the gaps are in to not only legal representation, but legal information, and how we can better assist people who are going down to the border to help. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, as far as I've seen in my email and many listservs of people who are organizing to go to the border, I think a lot of times the need is language skills, and not just Spanish, you know. A lot of people migrate to Mexico and try to come seek asylum at the southern border. A lot of French asylum seekers, I mean, who speak French or even Hindi as a language, so there's always a lack of that. So, you know, being able to sort of provide lawyers and BIA reps with, you know, translation services or interpretation services really is super critical in that I think moment, as well as being able to like do intakes with detainees to screen them for relief. There are great programs like the Innovation Law Lab that has software available for that. So, you know, those are two things I'll look into.
Practically speaking, also, if there's a way to streamline the process to get interpreters cleared to go into the detention centers, because attorneys don't need that clearance, but anybody who's not an attorney will have more difficulty and it'll take longer. So anything you can do sort of to help that along. I think the other thing, and I'm speaking from a very practical standpoint, is what we're seeing now is there's immigration, I think we mentioned earlier, immigration relief takes a long time. It's actually the long-term placement of the cases that's about to be in crisis, because a lot of people want to go to the border. You know, barred attorneys love going to the border, but then when you're like, great, here's a case, you might have it for 2 years, you're like, oh yeah, I don't know about that. So I think like, and I don't have a solution, or I probably would have figured it out, been doing it, but some sort of education around how long things take if you're successful with your immediate effort at the border is going to be a huge issue. Is a huge issue.
I just want to say that we also have been, Mike, but we have been organizing delegations that are going not just to the US border, but are also going to migrant-sending countries. So this year we were able to organize 2 delegations in collaboration with Alianza America, that is a national coalition, and also with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. We were able to produce a formal report that I can send to you, Professor. And also the second delegation was very important for us because Congressman Jim McGovern, who you know is very progressive, since the 80s have been supporting the immigrant community, was able to join us. And Mayor Kutatone, who in our opinion is one of the most progressive mayors in Massachusetts, he also was able to join us. So they went to visit El Salvador and Honduras, and we had meetings with civil society organizations there, and also with members of the government of countries. And we're thinking about organizing another delegation next year. We're going to invite our new congresswoman, Diana Carbajal, and see if she wants to join us. Because I think it's extremely important for them to understand that the crisis that we're facing is not starting at the US and Mexico border. That is not enough to go to the US border and take a picture with a kid that is crying, and then they said that here I am supporting immigrants. You have to go beyond the US border. And that's why we're going to Central America.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, this was great. I just wanted to thank the 4 of us. Thank the 4 of you. I'll try to get the list of books and actually get it to everybody, because I think that'll be. Thank you.
Thank you.